Hey folks, Nathan here from Star Wars Beyond the Films, the Star Wars Timeline Gold, and the Star Wars gaming podcast Cloud City Casino, which can be found at StarWarsReport.com, bringing you a look at another of the RPG adventures for Fantasy Flight Games. This is Star Wars Age of Rebellion, Friends Like These. Yes, this is the second of the three that I have been holding on to for a while because I hadn't had time to get to them. We've looked at Chronicles of the Gatekeeper for Force and Destiny, now we're looking at Friends Like These for Age of Rebellion. Next up is Mask of the Pirate Queen, the oldest of them, for Edge of the Empire. And when we look at this, we need to basically break it into two pieces. I'm going to start by looking at this as sort of an overview and review of the adventure for those who are going to play with it in their Age of Rebellion campaign, which is the primary use of this book. However, there are also people out there who pick up these books and also use it for purposes of research, of continuity, of chronology, to get more of the Star Wars universe story in some form or another. Been doing that since the days of West End games. For me, it's a matter of going through here and using information from the book about chronology to put on my Star Wars Timeline Gold, the most comprehensive Star Wars chronology available anywhere over at StarWarsFanWorks.com/timeline. There's a lot of detailed information in books like these, and it does wind up needing to be chronicled alongside other Star Wars stories, although which continuity it's in a lot of times tends to vary because, again, these RPGs are meant to be authentic Star Wars stories, not necessarily in one continuity or another. But this book manages to screw up its internal continuity, its internal chronology in referencing itself in the same way that Onslaught at Arda 1 did. It seems like with Age of Rebellion, Fantasy Flight Games just cannot get their chronological shit together when it comes to their adventures. They are constantly contradicting themselves when trying to do the adventures. But fortunately, as long as you're not focused on the chronological side of date references and whatnot, you can play this as a fun adventure. Just know that as soon as you start looking at the chronological details of the backgrounds of characters and things like that within this book, it's going to drive you nuts if you're continuity minded because they do not make consistent sense within the book. So first off, what is the story? Friends Like These is basically the story of the planet Zorn, a former separatist world. They wound up being blasted during the Clone Wars, but a group of people who managed to escape from the Empire from their homeworld wind up on the planet Zorn in Foundry 4, an old droid foundry, and have a new repair operation set up there that is used by, among others, the Rebel Alliance. But there is an Imperial named Nervi who, for some reason, as you find out within the story what his reason is, for some reason wants to wipe this settlement off the planet. Get rid of them entirely. Not just because of the need for the Rebel fleet's coordinates and such, but to just wipe them out for his own purposes as well. Which means that he's not letting the rest of the Empire in on the action. It's just him and his forces. The people on Zorn seek help and call upon our heroes to do so. They get there, help with the fortifications and whatnot, meet the leaders and such within the first episode, which in this case, the first episode is Trouble on Zorn. Okay. And then we continue on where they need to get allies. And when they visit the nearby Mandalorian community, that's a group of allies they can bring in, referring to them as old Mandalorians as opposed to true Mandalorians, but it's basically one of those fighting groups, kind of like Jango Fett's group that broke away from the new Mandalorians, who aren't in Death Watch, who are still honorable, but are also still warriors as well. So what we think of as true Mandalorians most of the time, but old Mandalorians and so forth. So we learn a bit about them. They wind up trying to make an alliance with the Zygerians, the Zygerian Slavers Guild, at least in their incarnation in this particular system, but there's a question of whether or not that's going to happen and how that will play out, if at all, as they learn more about the slavers throughout the course of the adventure, until finally, whether they've got the Mandalorians on their side, the Zygerians on their side, none of them on their side, both of them, whatever allies they've managed to make, time is up. There's a ticking clock in this adventure of only 48 hours, and when that 48 hours is up, the Empire gets to Zorn, and the battle begins whether you're ready or not. And the battle itself is handled very well, in that you've got multiple stages of the battle in orbit and on the ground leading to a final phase. And during the process, there are little side mission type things that the heroes can also do until eventually getting to the end of episode 4, completing the adventure, getting their rewards, and there are other adventure hooks and ideas in the back of the book for if you want to continue on with this sector, these characters, and so forth, and continue your interactions with them, as oftentimes RPG players are wont to do. I actually think this is a fun sort of ticking clock type of mission. It's very straightforward what they need to do, who they need to do it with, but there's a lot of negotiation involved and a lot of fighting involved. There's some diplomacy, there's some ass-kicking. It has something for all the different classes of Age of Rebellion to really sink their teeth into. In that sense, this is a pretty fun, cool adventure. I actually think this is better than Onslaught at Arda 1, in my opinion, but that's probably because I like a more varied adventure, and Onslaught at Arda 1 was much more just a straight combat thing. This also is the adventure module that provides, as it notes there on the back, special rules for Mandalorian humans, giving players the opportunity to play the proud warriors from Mandalore, which is a major reason why just about anyone who wants to play Age of Rebellion is probably going to want to pick this up, whether they want to run the adventure or not, because Mandalorians are cool, supposedly. I think they're kind of overrated, but generally Mandalorians are considered cool. People may grab this for that. So, if you want to play with Mandalorians, if you want a fun Age of Rebellion adventure that's already ready to go for you, that has a lot of variation in it for all your different character types to really have a place, and to make some new allies and enemies for future campaigns, absolutely check out Friends Like These. It is the best, in my opinion, of the Age of Rebellion adventures so far. That said, second half of the review or overview here is the chronological aspect. If you're trying to get this as a chronological reference or something that you're looking at for research type of information or continuity information, they've screwed it up all over again, just like Onslaught at Arda 1. Two ways that I can think of off the top of my head where this is an inconsistent thing. The smaller one is that we have this guy who is a Zygerian prince. He's Atai Molech's son, if you remember Atai Molech from the Clone Wars. And basically, there are different points in the story in which they talk about when he got to the place that you meet the Zygerians here, like when he started ruling this particular village or settlement. And sometimes it says it was about a decade ago. Other times it says it was 2 years ago. And they use those constantly interchangeably as if somehow a decade and 2 years are the same thing. Spoiler alert, they're not. So those references don't make a whole lot of sense by themselves. But on top of that, you have a much more convoluted and yet seemingly detailed background for one of the leaders on the hero side. It's a guy named Cal. And Cal apparently had his father killed by the Empire when he was an infant, which means his father had to have been killed no earlier than 19 BBY, right? Because before that, it's not the Empire, it's the Republic. So 19 BBY or later is when his father must have died, when he must have been an infant, and therefore when he must have been born. At the age of 12, his mother dies, and his grandfather takes him to live with him on Zorn. Okay? He's there, straight through, and when he's 19, his grandfather dies, and he becomes the new leader in his grandfather's place, which seems to be a recent event given the attitudes of many of the characters in the base towards him within this story. And that's all well and good. That all makes chronological sense. Except there's a section in which you're supposed to be able to question this character and ask them about their life and what's going on in the base so that you can get to know them. Because the other background information isn't necessarily being given to the characters. And when asked specifically about how long have you been here, as in how long have you been on this planet, not how long have you been leading, but how long have you been here, the character answers, I've been here for 6 years since my grandfather died. Which makes no sense whatsoever with all the other information. Because, one, it wasn't when his grandfather died that he went to Zorn. It was when his mother died, and then he was taken there by his grandfather. When his grandfather died was when he took control as the leader, not when he arrived. And there's not a 6-year gap in his life we're dealing with. It's a 7-year gap. From age 12 when his mother died and he winds up going there to age 19 when he becomes the leader. Assuming that that was very recently so that we don't have to add even more time to that for when he came to the world. Even then, you could say that 7-year gap could be more like 6 if we're rounding, because it could be something like Jyn Erso's age, where it just happens to be maybe it's early in this year and he came late in the other year right before he turned 13 or something. That's kind of okay to figure out, but you still have this issue of, since my grandfather died, I've been there, as opposed to mother, and it being 6 years ago. If we take him at his word that he somehow got there, or he's meaning he became leader when his grandfather died 6 years ago, and his grandfather died when he was 19, that means that this character is at least 25. Well, if he's at least 25 during the events of the original trilogy, shortly after A New Hope, when all of Age of Rebellion is taking place, then that doesn't make any sense at all either. Because for him to be 25 at that point means that he was an infant, which is when his father would have been killed by the Empire, before the Clone Wars even happened. So there was no Empire. So that doesn't make sense. But if we still assume that he was an infant, the earliest possible, which would be 19 BBY, for his father to be killed by the Empire, then for him to be 25 years old, again 19 plus 6, would put this story 2 years after Return of the Jedi. The Emperor's already fallen, and most of the setting for the story doesn't make sense anymore. It's like when they're writing these books, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. It doesn't seem to happen with Edge of the Empire or Force and Destiny, but they are constantly fucking up their own internal chronology and continuity in the adventures for Age of Rebellion. They need to get their act together. They're putting together quality products for the adventures, but when it comes to the details, and the devil or the Sith is in the details, they keep tripping over their own damn feet. Seriously, Fantasy Flight, why can't you get your internal consistency right with these Age of Rebellion adventures? It's not that hard. Take notes on a piece of paper. So, that being said, should you check out Friends Like These for a fun adventure? Absolutely. Should you check it out for internally consistent chronological information if you're into this for research for, say, Wikipedia or a timeline like mine or something like that? There's information to be had, but don't expect it to actually make sense when taken in context with, itself. Damn.